Clashes, mosque burnings, killings. It seems like an annual agenda that colors the lives of people living in India, a country of rich culture and ethnic diversity. India has faced serious human rights and religious equality issues that have become more complicated over time. These problems are inseparable from the long history of the colonial era to the social and political conditions that affect the state's life in India today. In talking about India and religious discrimination, we need to dig into the roots of the problem to at least get to know a little bit about what tensions are happening in India today. We will now skip ahead to an era when Islam was not yet present in India. By the 6th century, the country had established trade relations with Arab traders who were regular visitors to India's Konkan and Malabar coasts. Historian Sir Eliot and John Dawson says in their book, The History of India, that the first ships carrying Muslim traders were seen on the Indian coast as early as 630. Additionally, Rawlinson, in his book Ancient and Medieval History of India, claims that Arab Muslims first settled on the Indian coast in the late 7th century. It was these Arab Muslim traders who later spread Islam to India. Initially, Islam was spread in the Lakshadweep Islands, located just west of the Malabar coast, by Ubaidullah in 661. He stayed in India until his death. However, although world history records that Islam only entered and spread in India in 661, history in India writes that mosques have existed in India since 629 in Kodungalur, Kerala, during the Chera dynasty, because the last ruler, King Cheraman Perumal, converted to Islam. It is known that the first mosque was the Cheraman Juma Mosque, which is thought to have been built by Malik bin Dinar, one of the first propagators of Islam in India who came from Arabia. Some historians are still debating about this first mosque because other versions state that the first mosque was built in Gujarat around 610 and 623. Regarding the spread of Islam, it is likely that the Mapula community in Malabar was the first Muslim community to convert to Islam until its spread expanded with intensive proselytization activities carried out along the coast. In 672, Muhammad bin Qasim, a 17-year-old Muslim general, was the first to lead an invasion of India and reach Sindh. In the 8th century, battles occurred between the Umayyad Caliphate and the Indian kingdoms. Still, the Umayyads could not conquer India and only gained full control up to Sindh. Then around the 10th century, a Muslim kingdom in Central Asia called Ghaznawiya, led by Mahmud of Ghazni, made a second Muslim invasion. The battle successfully invaded India and established the Delhi Sultanate in 1206. The Sultanate also controlled most of North India until a follow-up attack was made to target South India. Unfortunately, the Delhi Sultanate collapsed due to internal conflicts before controlling all of India. Even so, during the reign of the Delhi Sultanate, there was already a synthesis of civilization between India and Islam that significantly influenced Indian culture and society. This included the development of Islamic architecture, population, economic growth, and the emergence of the Hindustani language. The Delhi Sultanate also successfully resisted Mongol invasions in the 13th and 14th centuries that came to destroy India. Its role did not end there because, in terms of technology, some developments felt the impact of changes in the 13th century in India. The Delhi Sultanate adopted technology from the Islamic world, such as water-lifting technology and spinning machines, that played an important role in increasing the efficiency of the work of the people at that time, mostly farmers and artisans. In the early 16th century, the Mughal Sultanate emerged and ruled North India peacefully, displacing the crumbling Delhi Sultanate. The Mughal Sultanate did not fight the local communities it ruled. Instead, it used an inclusive approach through new administrative practices so that they could establish a more systematic and centralized government. The Mughal Empire was led by Akbar, who managed to unify a vast territory by emulating the Persian system and submitting to an emperor who had an almost godlike status. Akbar also managed his sultanate's economic policies well, with the largest source of economic output coming from agriculture and crafts that could enter larger markets, allowing his subjects to prosper. This helped India to expand economically around the 17th century. History also records that the Mughal Empire was the largest economy in the world in the 17th century, even bigger than the Qing Empire in China and Western Europe. However, in the 18th century, Mughal rule ended at the hands of British forces, and India passed into British colonial hands. After the British East India Company formed a partnership to begin controlling the Indian Ocean region, it unseated the Mughal Empire, the Marathas, and the Mysoreans, which dominated India at the time. After the First War for India's independence, known as the 1857 Indian Rebellion, the British colonial government finally took over the government to establish the British Empire. The British Empire spanned almost all of India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, except for small areas controlled by other European countries. India during the days of the British Empire was divided into two types of territories, namely British India and the princely state, an entity within India that was not ruled directly by the British Empire, but by local rulers who were subservient to Britain. This separation would later lead to the creation of Pakistan's territory, which would split into the Islamic Republic of Pakistan and the People's Republic of Bangladesh. The British Empire would last for almost 100 years and only ended in 1947 after various uprisings by the Indian people. It should be noted that during the reign of the colonial government that lasted that long, not only did the division of territories occur, but typical colonial policies that divided religious and ethnic groups also began to emerge. These policies and actions of the colonial government led to negative sentiments, religious rivalries, and jealousy over differences in the treatment of religious communities, which triggered rebellions and inter-religious conflicts. Hence, while fighting for independence from colonial rule, many important Indian leaders also fought to unite these interfaith communities, especially Hindus and Muslims. They wanted an India that was not divided. Some important Indian Muslim nationalists include Abdul Ghaffar Khan, also known as Frontier Gandhi, due to his close relationship with Mahatma Gandhi. Abdul Ghaffar Khan spent 45 years of his life in prison for his struggle to liberate and unite India. Then there was Muhammad Umar Subhani, an industrialist and millionaire from Bombay, who gave Mahatma Gandhi Congress fees and eventually died for freedom. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, a nationalist who later became the founder of Pakistan, had been a member of the Indian National Congress, even participating in the struggle for India's independence and unity until 1920. Muhammad Iqbal, India's leading poet and philosopher, was also a proponent of Hindu-Muslim unity in India. There were also Muhammad Ali Jauhar Khan and Shaukat Ali Khan, who fought for the emancipation of Muslims in India, and they fought for India's independence alongside Mahatma Gandhi. After India proclaimed its independence, the country was divided into two territories, India and Pakistan. Pakistan would further split into the Islamic Republic of Pakistan and the People's Republic of Bangladesh. India's Independence Act had specified that the partition took place on August 15, 1947, but Pakistan specified that its Independence Day and state formation took place on August 14, 1947. The transition and power-sharing ceremony was held in Karachi, the capital of Pakistan. It also marked the end of the British Empire's rule over India, but tragically, the Independence Day that should have been a happy momentum for its people instead gave birth to fighting that caused more than 12 million people to be displaced. The total death toll is not certain to this day, but is estimated to be in the hundreds of thousands to 1 million. The violence that took place during the partition was a precursor to the hostility and suspicion between India and Pakistan that plague relations between the two countries to this day. It is known that after partition, 2/3 of Muslims ended up living in Pakistan, with the rest settling in India. According to the 1951 census, there was a population shift that saw around 7,226,000 Muslims leave India and move to Pakistan, and 7,249,000 Hindus and Sikhs, the followers of Sikhism, moved from Pakistan to India. In the process, violence increased. Some international critics blame the British for leaving India during the partition process without helping maintain public order in the former colony. As a result, the two newly independent countries were overwhelmed with organizing their people and maintaining order. The states that were supposed to protect minorities on both sides of the border were also deemed to have failed in their duty, leading to many deaths in riots and massacres due to the lack of safe spaces available to the victims. According to Richard Simons, a historian, at least 500,000 people died, and 12 million were displaced in the process. Tensions between India and Pakistan have worsened following a territorial dispute in Kashmir. The Indian government, the Pakistani government, and Kashmiri guerrillas are fighting for control of Kashmir, which remains unresolved to this day. The conflict dates back to the partition of India and Pakistan in 1947. At that time, local rulers in various regions were invited to join India or Pakistan or choose their independence. However, Hari Singh, the then ruler of Jammu and Kashmir, was confused as his region had a large Muslim population. However, Maharaja Hari Singh himself was a Hindu. However, he eventually chose to join India, which triggered fighting and conflict. After this decision, it is recorded that the first battle between India and Pakistan was fought in Kashmir. The war was stopped and mediated by the United Nations, which made both parties sign a ceasefire agreement in 1949. However, it is known that India and Pakistan have fought at least a few more times, namely in 1965, 1971, and 1999. This dispute finally led India to control around 43% of the Kashmir region, which covers Jammu, the Kashmir Valley, Ladakh, and the Siachen Ganges. Meanwhile, Pakistan controls 37% of Kashmir, which covers Azad Kashmir and the northern part of Gilgit-Baltistan. Another conflict ensued between Kashmiri guerrilla groups who wanted their independence and the Indian government, which wanted to defend its territory. In July 1988, demonstrations, strikes, and even attacks on the Indian government created chaos in Jammu and Kashmir, which soon escalated into a critical internal security issue in the 1990s as it claimed thousands of lives. In this conflict, religion played a crucial role, as most Kashmiris were Muslims, and any party claiming territory should be able to assert their rights as Muslims. Still, the local population did not trust India to fulfill them. As a result, the security and stability of the Kashmir region have been compromised as the conflict has become increasingly complicated to resolve. In line with the Kashmir conflict, in the mid-70s, when communal riots or religious violence in India occurred, Muslims in India were finally separated from other groups under the pretext of security. This condition worsened when there were riots and other violence between Muslims and Hindus in Bhagalpur district, Bihar, in 1989. The riots escalated, even becoming a trend after the demolition of the Babri Mosque in 1992. In this situation, some big cities whose intention was to protect Muslims ended up creating ghettos, separate areas to be occupied by the Muslim population, which is a minority in India, thus creating a distinction between Hindu-dominated and Muslim-dominated neighborhoods. Such ghettos have been established in Mumbai, Delhi, and Kolkata, which have large Muslim populations. Unfortunately, what was intended to provide security to the Muslim community has become a new disaster. During the Hindu-Muslim riots in Gujarat in 2002, several ghettos were targeted by rioters who marked Muslim neighborhoods. After the riots, Hindu-Muslim tensions escalated, and many Muslims chose to move to the ghettos for safety. This displacement made the population in the ghetto even denser. In the Juhapura area of Ahmedabad, the Muslim population of 250,000 has grown to 650,000 since the 2002 riots. Muslims in Gujarat had no choice but to go to the ghetto. Talking about the conflict between Islam and Hinduism in India is a very complex thing because of its long history. It dates back to the Umayyad Caliphate's invasion of Sindh through war and violence. Hindus also experienced persecution during the invasion, plus the destruction of Hindu temples such as those in Somnath and the anti-Hindu practices of the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb. This condition was exacerbated by British colonialism, whose policies were considered unable to fulfill the rights of religious communities in India, which triggered the seeds of conflict. When India was partitioned in 1947, there was a large-scale inter-religious strife that led to bloodshed across the country. The partition also meant independence for India and Pakistan. However, India's independence has led to the constitution of a secular state, or in the sense that the state and religion exist in separate spaces. Since post-independence, the Indian government has sought to safeguard and ensure all groups receive equal treatment. The problem is that Hindu nationalists have fiercely resisted this concept because they believe that the idea of secularism is a fraudulent foreign practice that can blur a nation's identity. In this case, it meant blurring Hindu identity in India, which would be detrimental to Hindus. The anger of Hindus intensified after the Congress Party government enacted different laws for Hindus and Muslims, with Hindus feeling that the laws were not in their favor. In addition, there are right-wing Hindus who believe that India is a Hindu country, so they think that people other than Hindus are not part of India. The idea became known as Hindutva and was promoted by a right-wing Hindu group called the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh in 1925. These ideas and ideologies are quite extreme and can even cost lives. An example is the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi by right-wing Hindu extremists for not accepting Gandhi's idea of an open India, which, according to the perpetrators, Gandhi was a defender of Islam. Over time, as tensions between Hindus and Muslims continued to heat up, there was a long-term history of large-scale violence in several regions. These include the Gujarat riots in 1969, the Bhiwandi riots in 1970, the Nellie massacre in 1983, and the Bhagalpur violence in 1989. These conflicts more often arise due to the ideology of right-wing Hindu nationalism, which began to gain momentum in the 1970s after the Indira Gandhi regime, and the Congress Party were severely protested when implementing the emergency period. During the emergency, many opposition figures, including those in cahoots with right-wing Hindu groups, were arrested and jailed for provoking riots and disrupting state security. As we entered the 1990s, the right-wing Hindu influence grew stronger, and its propaganda became louder and more embedded in society. The situation never cooled down and worsened after the demolition of the Babri Mosque in Ayodhya. The demolition of the mosque took place in 1992 by the Hindu nationalist Bharatiya Janata Party, often abbreviated as BJP and other extremist Hindutva organizations. They do not hesitate to use harsh methods against Muslims in India to instill their ideology. Muslim groups who saw this situation could not remain silent and carried out counterattacks that triggered other riots, such as the Bombay riots and even the Bombay bombings in 1993. Islamic militants also carried out an attack in 1998 known as the Prankot Massacre, in which 29 Hindus were killed after they refused to convert to Islam and refused to eat beef, which is considered sacred by Hindus. Because of these tragedies, the native Hindu population of Kashmir was forced to migrate out of Muslim-majority Kashmir after a warning gave them two options: convert to Islam or be killed. There were an estimated 300,000 to 350,000 Hindus who fled Kashmir from the mid-1980s to the 1990s. Many of them lived in miserable conditions in the Jammu refugee camp. In 2002, there were unprecedented riots in Gujarat that left 1,000 people dead in the tragedy, most of whom were allegedly Muslims. However, some other sources claim that the death toll reached 2,000 Muslims. The riots were attributed to retaliation for the Godhra train burning, where 58 Hindus were burned alive in a planned train fire. In this case, there are allegations that the state was involved in triggering the riots, and there is a main figure who allegedly allowed these riots to occur, namely Narendra Modi, who was then the supreme leader in Gujarat and is currently the #1 person in India with the title of Prime Minister. This conflict then had a long tail. In 2010, there were Diganga riots in West Bengal, which began on September 6, 2010. These riots were carried out by Islamic groups who committed arson and violence in Hindu neighborhoods in Diganga. The riots began in the afternoon and continued through the night and into the next morning. The District Police, Rapid Action Force, Central Reserve Police Force, and Border Security Forces that were deployed all failed to stop the mob violence. The government finally deployed the army on the main roads. However, the Islamist violence continued in the interior villages. 2 years after the Diganga incident, in 2012, there was violence in the Assam region between the indigenous Hindu Bodos and Muslim groups occupying East Bengal. In this tragedy, at least 108 people were killed, and 400,000 people were forced to flee to avoid further bloodshed. Major riots broke out again in 2020. This time, it took place in Delhi, which left more than 53 people dead and hundreds injured. The riots were triggered by protests against Prime Minister Narendra Modi's new citizenship law. Many critics see the law as problematic and anti-Muslim and is therefore considered to be a Hindu nationalist agenda that the BJP aspires to. In 2022, the Indian city of Udaipur went into lockdown after 2 of its citizens were killed. This tragedy could have happened because the victim, a Hindu tailor, was considered to support insulting the Prophet Muhammad after sharing a post that seemed to support the BJP spokesperson. Finally, some riots occurred in 2023, namely the Haryana riots. The violence began when Hindu groups, Bajrang Dal and Vishwa Hindu Parishad, led a religious ceremony through the Muslim-majority Nuh district. Muslims were outraged when it was announced that the religious ceremony involved Monu Manassar, who was wanted by police as a suspect in the murder of 2 Muslim men. The clashes resulted in 7 fatalities and more than 200 injuries. In the aftermath of these riots, the BJP government was heavily criticized for allowing the presence of Monu Manassar, which angered local Muslims and led to the riots. As a result of the criticism, the government's response was to impose a curfew, suspend the internet, and deploy additional troops to patrol the area. Critics continue to blame the BJP government for not preventing the riots and allowing the situation to escalate potentially. Today, discriminatory attitudes are common among religious communities in India, especially Muslims. It is not uncommon for them to find it difficult to access education, employment, or even basic services regarding government administration or health services. Many consider that, over time, discriminatory treatment has worsened, and this is believed to be the aftermath of the anti-Islamic policies passed by Narendra Modi. Indeed, after Narendra Modi of the BJP came to power, his supporters began to become more violent towards minority groups, especially Muslim groups. For example, a year after the BJP came to power, the BJP mob dared to kill at least 49 Muslim farmers for selling and slaughtering cattle that did not conform to the teachings of Hindutva. Most of the perpetrators escaped or were immune from the law, so there was no justice for this case. This has become a world spotlight and received condemnation from various parties. In India itself, many Muslim groups voiced their resistance and continue to demand the rights they have as Indian citizens. For example, one of the actions that went viral in October 2022 was a young girl named Muskan Khan, who protested the ban on wearing the hijab at her school in Karnataka. Amidst the cheers of her male peers who shouted Hindu slogans, Muskan Khan shouted back one of Islam's slogans, Allahu Akbar, loudly. This action drew support from hundreds of Muslims in India, who also protested against the ban and the highly discriminatory school policy. As a result, to quell the unrest, the local government ordered the school to revoke the rule from the school policy for the time being. In reality, the daily lives of Muslims and Hindus in different parts of India are very diverse. Not all of them are filled with conflict and tension. There are also some areas where people live in harmony amidst diversity. Situations may continue to change due to various factors that can affect the fate of the people, whether political, economic, or social factors. they can indeed be very complex when dealing with the interests of certain groups. In this case, ultra-nationalism is a group that is quite in control in shaping influence in society by voicing fear and anxiety that Muslims will become the majority in India, so that Hindus, especially the right wing, feel threatened because the estimated Muslim population will beat Hindus in India in 2050, according to research conducted by Pew Research.